So the new company is called Connect, Kenekt, and the reason we chose that is the root definition of CONNECT. The definition spelling is KENEKT. And so kind of the story is like we're defining how connections take place through LinkedIn, and then we branded that product Connected, and then we helped them create a branded proprietary process called Connect to Convert. And the 3 pillars of that are Connect, Engage, Convert. And so it's just kind of, I mean, I'm probably jumping in, but that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Like, these guys have been talking for years about doing this, and within 3 weeks we did it, and they went out and created $7,500 a month in recurring revenue in like 3 to 4 weeks, because they actually knew how to now talk about it. Like, but they've been talking about doing it for.
Yeah, I mean, so that's just the power of striking a nerve once you really nail the story down. So, well, so I mean, so this thing's broadcasting now. We're gonna try this as an experiment. We haven't actually done this before, but we're gonna broadcast via Google Hangout, and then it'll be preserved so people that missed it couldn't make it tonight. So thank you guys for coming out. We have a lot of new faces. Just to let you know, this is a recurring thing we do. It's LeanPhx. Typically, our whole mission is around kind of like spreading how to do lean startup effectively, and everything that goes involved with that, the customer development, lean startup principles, all that stuff. So really kind of with the main goal being help folks who are trying to do something new, trying to do a startup venture, give them a lot higher likelihood of success. All the pre-validation, cramming learning cycles way down, and not have people like spin their wheels chasing the wrong thing for years, right? So I met Chris through the Team AZ Slack room, and then one of those dinners that we did, and he is super good at storytelling. And I see this again and again in all the people that I deal with, is that a big problem people have is they get so in their own head, they want to, they've got this brilliant idea and they've got the solution in mind, and then they go out and they're in their own head and they're unable to communicate to people what their vision is and get them on board. And the name of the game early with startups is all about, like, your product's going to change. You shouldn't get wedded to whatever your vision of the product is at that time. It's a matter of building those early evangelists, they call them, getting a lot of support, learning about the problem space, falling in love with the problem and not so much your solution to that problem, right? And so part and parcel of that is being able to effectively tell your story, to rally those early evangelists, to build your brand and all that stuff. And so that's why we have Chris here tonight. And Chris is going to talk about the Campfire effect. I won't tell your story. You did.
No, perfect. How long do you go till, Sean?
We can go. We have this room, I think, until 8, but we can break before then or stay a little after in the parking lot, like whatever you guys want to do. So.
Okay. We'll just make it really interactive. Like, make it a campfire.
Yeah.
Can I plug into the screen?
Yes.
And
are you doing most of your work on the whiteboard?
Most of it. Yeah, okay. Almost all of it.
All right, let's wheel that over just so folks can see it that want to.
Yeah, where's this best? I don't know where's the best position for you guys to see the whiteboard.
You can probably put it here so y'all can see it, that screen can see it, and you can just kind of work alongside of it.
Okay, perfect.
Does that still work for you? Can you see it? Yeah, we'll kind of like put the bulk of people that way. So good.
And you know what, Sean? I'm not going to worry about the screen.
Okay.
We'll just whiteboard.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sometimes I think we do too many PowerPoints. We should just talk.
Go back to the old technology.
Yeah, we should just talk. The old technology. The dry erase marker.
CEI will take issue if we actually let a campfire in here. But
Other than that,
we're good.
So that's right. So Chris Smith, I'm a 5th generation native of Arizona. So my family got into the valley in 1877. Was one of the first families here, and it's just amazing. Like what the pioneers, like, man, they came here in people say, like, why did your family come to Arizona? Like, well, they got here in January, so they were probably like, this place is awesome. And they didn't know about the summertime, but it's just amazing what they carved out of the desert here. The water systems that are now set up and all that stuff I take for granted. But so the reason I share that is, I've always had a really profound connection to my roots because we talked about that a lot. 5 generations. I grew up in a farming, ranching, rodeo family, so we grew up on the ranch, and we were able to hear these stories about these amazing sacrifices that really, for all intents and purposes, you talk about incredibly gutsy, entrepreneurs. That's what they were, you know. They came out here very entrepreneurial. And so I still compete in rodeo to this day. If I had my slide, I'd show you one of my pictures. But I team rope. If any of you know anything about rodeo, I do the team roping event. So I'm still really competitive in that, to my wife's chagrin. She always reminds me of all the nice things we could have if we didn't have horses. Because like dirt biking, they don't eat, right? When a dirt bike's not going, it doesn't eat stuff. So it's an expensive hobby. But still love the rodeo, team rope. Married to my hero, my 4 kids, and my best friend. So, you know, one of the things that I was always fascinated with storytelling as a kid. And I think it might have been just growing up around cowboy storytellers that had that impact on me. I was always fascinated with this idea of influencing other people. And what fascinated me about influence was the opportunity of it and the challenge of human connection. So in 6th grade, at the year-end school assembly, before summer break, and they're trying to make up awards to give to kids to make them feel good about themselves. Like every kid needs an award, right? So a couple of my friends got awards for like most likely to succeed, most likely to be president of the United States. And then they called it Chris Smith. And I got the award for least likely to be found in my seat. That was the best they could come up with for me for the entire year. My mom was really embarrassed in the audience. And I definitely had to talk about that when I got home. Like, why did I get that award? But the reason I was never in my seat is because I just could not help but be up telling stories to people. Like, I just love to talk and tell stories and influence. And story, I learned early on, is the only way I knew how to get a point across. So if I couldn't tell a story associated with it, it's hilarious because I got tagged in a meme earlier today that was like, I don't think the teacher understands moving my desk will not solve the problem. And so that was kind of me. So I was always fascinated with this idea of storytelling, but I didn't really start using it professionally until I went into commercial real estate in 2004. So I went into a very traditional industry of commercial real estate simply because I saw people making money that I knew. And I thought, hey, I want to make a lot of money. And so I totally picked my career based on that. I went to commercial real estate. And when I got into commercial real estate, I had this really powerful observation around a struggle or a challenge. And that observation was I was going on listing appointments with brokers that had been in the office 10, 15, 20 years, and they were training me, right? So they'd send me, you know, my job was to shut up and listen and just observe how these guys did it because they know what they were doing. So I'd show up on these listing appointments with these guys, and it blew me away because we'd get to these listing appointments and the broker would talk 80 to 90% of the meeting. Never ask that person questions about who they were. Never get to know them at a level anything deeper than business. And to me, how I was raised and grew up, that was so, right, just against like my nature. Like what just came naturally to me is like, why are they not asking these people like about their story or who they are, connecting with them? And then and then 90% of the time the broker was talking, they would never talk about like who they were, their family, their interests. It was always about like commercial real estate statistics and how much real estate they moved last year and how they were so qualified to help. And I just couldn't help but feel that 90% of what we were talking to people about, they could care less about. And so I just was able to observe this human connection that was not taking place. And it just would happen every meeting I would go to. And you know, the brokers would just kind of chalk it up. Sometimes we got the listing appointment, sometimes we didn't. So I had this really powerful, so that was the observation I had. So I had this really powerful realization, and I thought, if I'm going to have any success in commercial real estate, it's got to be very different than how these guys are doing it, because all of the things that they're relying on, I don't have any of that. I have no experience. I have no credibility. I haven't sold any commercial real estate or leased any commercial. I don't even know anything about commercial real estate at this point. And I was 22 and I looked like I was 12, right? So every odd that could be stacked against me was against me. And so the realization I had was that if I was going to be successful in commercial real estate, it wasn't going to be because of how much success I'd had in the past that I could tout. It was going to be because I could connect with people. So the only thing I had to go on was my roots of how I was raised, and I would just show up and I would just have very different conversations with people. So my goal quickly became that when I go onto an appointment, I'm going to try and get that person talking at least 75% of the first meeting. I'm going to totally reverse the role. Well, you can't get someone else talking 75% of the time unless you know how to ask good questions. So that then became, so first the goal was to listen, but in order to listen, you have to ask questions. So my goal became like, I was constantly thinking of questions to ask people. And I read books on it. I studied how to ask questions. I studied how to influence people through questions. And I quickly became this believer that I believe you can get anything you want in this world and influence anyone with anything if you know how to ask the right question. And so I had to quickly learn how to ask questions, get them talking. And the types of questions I asked were totally foreign to what most of the commercial real estate world would ask. I would ask questions. I tried to get them to not talk about commercial real estate for as long as I could to really connect with them. Then when it was my turn to talk, I didn't talk about commercial real estate for a couple reasons. One, I didn't know anything about it. And two, I didn't have any background in it. So I would tell them I'm a 5th generation native of Arizona. I would talk about my family. I would talk about the fact that I rodeo. And I found people were fascinated with that. They were so much more, that's so much more interesting than commercial real estate. And I would invite people over to come ride horses at my barn, and I would try to really build relationships. Within several months, I was one of the top producing brokers in the office. I went off the draw faster than anyone ever had. Like, no one had ever gone off the draw, which is basically they give you enough so that you don't die, but not enough to like pay your bills, right? And so 2 months in, I told the broker I want to go off the draw. And he's like, no way. He's like, you'll never make it. Like, so in my best interest, he's like, I'm not. Because we never had anyone go off the draw sooner than a year. I was like, well, I'm going off because I want to get in, because you couldn't get into the commission structure by being on the draw. So he's like, all right, I'll let you off at 3 months. So within several months, I was one of the top producing brokers, and it just blew these brokers away. Like, they thought, you're a punk kid. It's almost like I didn't have the right to be successful. So some of them started saying, well, what are you doing? What do you do on your listing appointments? So I would tell them, and at first they were like, no way. Come on, what do you really do? And I was like, this is what I do. These are the questions I ask. I get to know their story. I tell them my story. So eventually they started trying it, and some of them started coming back and saying, hey, your voodoo magic Jedi mind trick storytelling really works on people. I was like, no, it's not like a Jedi. It's just being an authentic person, right? But they started realizing, man, when you do it this way, they started seeing a noticeable difference in the connection they would have with people, how people would connect with them. So what planted the seed for me was I could teach this. That was like this really, and this thing that came natural to me, just probably in how I was raised, I started to soon realize was very unnatural for a lot of the world. So I didn't do anything with it. It just kind of planted that seed. So I was never really happy in commercial real estate. As you can, like, I'm a very creative, love to create stories and brands, so it's kind of odd I ended up. But I was good at it, and I could make really great money, and I had little kids, so I stayed in for 5 years. Finally, after 5 years, I was done. So much to everyone telling me I was insane for getting out of commercial real estate after 5 years, I left without any plan of what I was going to do. And for the next few years, I went on the most crazy journey that I would never suggest anyone do. But I'm grateful I did it, because I sold everything from products, services, ideas, dreams, and about every industry you can imagine. Like, there's hardly an industry you can bring up that I probably haven't sold something in it. Or what was great about that is I made a ton of mistakes. I learned a ton of things, but it further emphasized this point that I could go into almost any industry and do pretty good, and sometimes be a top producer in a short amount of time with knowing very little about the industry, because I always relied on my ability to connect with people through story. Now, that doesn't mean that I was not trying to learn as much as I could about all these industries I would go into, but what it did is every industry I went into, it forced me to work more on my game about connecting with people, because I didn't have any of the other, I didn't have the benefit of guys that had been there for years. I never had that, because I'd never stuck anywhere long enough, right? So where this story comes and how the Campfire and what this ties into tonight is I finally went into financial services. So I was on a city league basketball team with a buddy who, he grinded on me for like 2 years. You got to get into financial services. You'd love it. You're great at building relationships. You could build a lifelong, business and build a book of business and just rodeo. And that sounded great. So I joined this financial services company. So I still had these observations around human connection and how people struggled. One of the things, every business I went into, the number one struggle I saw that they had was they didn't know how to take what they had up here. It was really clear to them. They didn't know how to get it to come out of their mouth in a way that was really impactful and differentiated. And that was just a common struggle. It's like, how do we tell people what we do in a way that's really powerful, but unique and different? So I joined this financial services company, and after being there about 5 months, things were going really well. They decided to merge with an insurance planning firm. So they took a 43-year-old insurance planning firm and a 20-year-old financial services company and put them both into a new office together, and pretty much was like, hey, good luck. And these two firms were night and day. The leadership styles, their offerings. So I'm sitting there watching this train wreck unfold, right? That's about to come down the tracks. And I went to the owner and I just said, hey, I think we could have a really unbelievable brand here, but we've got to be way more intentional about what we want this brand to become. And we got to put a lot more thought into getting really clear on what this brand's going to stand for, because everyone had a different idea of the brand. Everyone had a totally different story. If you would ask someone, hey, what do we do? Ed would say something totally different than Jack. And so as a result, the culture started to suffer, the client experience. So I went to Jeremy one day and I said, hey, Jeremy, we're friends, right? He's like, yeah, why? I was like, well, so I want to be really blunt with you. I said, I think there's a train wreck, you know, and I said, I have some ideas. So he said, yeah, run with it. He's like, I've got so much on my plate. So I made a ton of mistakes in the beginning. I tried to shove this idea of culture and brand and story down everyone's throats. And I realized really quickly, if it's not their idea, they don't like it. And so long story short, we went through this exhaustive process of totally redesigning a new brand and what we stood for, a new story that everyone was on the same page with. But most importantly, it wasn't just that we developed a new story. We helped each individual in the firm understand how their personal story and the journey they'd been on, how it connected to that brand story. So now when they went out and talked to people, the focus wasn't the company. The focus was them and that personal connection. And they were able to tell the story of how their personal story tied to this company. We redesigned the office to give a storytelling tour so that every time someone came to the office, the first thing we did was took them on this tour of our office to tell them the story of who we were and how these two firms came together. And it worked. Like, we had like a 95% close rate at the office. If people came and stepped foot in that office, they became clients. And within 2.5 years, we were bringing in as many assets under management in a month as we'd ever done in the history of the firm in a year. And that's when I caught fire for the first time in my life. My favorite quote's by Mark Twain. He said, the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. And for me, that was like, I finally realized, like, this is why I was put on the earth. Because up to that point in time, I had little kids and I worked to hustle to make money for my family. But for the first time, I felt a calling, like, this is what I was put on the earth to do. So we started the Campfire Effect. And again, everyone told me I was crazy because they're like, you just got done doing all the hard work for 2.5 years. You became a 10% owner, just like in commercial real estate. When things get really good is when I usually leave. So it's really smart, right? That's kind of been the pattern. But I'm sticking with the Campfire Effect. So what's the Campfire Effect? So I want to talk to you guys about, I'll tell you what the Campfire Effect is, but how we came about creating it. I'm going to talk to you about the power of having a branded proprietary process in your business when you explain to people how you do what you do. Because what I've found is where most startups and small businesses lose people, lose investors, where they lose clients, isn't in explaining what they do. We think that's where all the gold is if we can tell people really clearly what we do. The what we do is just a smell test. When we tell people what we do, that's just to see if they're interested in learning more. Where we lose people is if they don't have confidence in how we're going to do it, how we're going to execute it. And that's where we spend the least amount of time as entrepreneurs, especially startups, thinking about that. I mean, a startup more than anyone, right? They need to raise money. They need to build a team. If they're not clear on what their brand stands for and how to tell their story, I don't care how great a product or service you have. If you can't go out and articulate to people really clearly and powerfully what you do and how you do it, it's going to be hard to get money from an investor. And more than likely, you're going to build a team that is the wrong team. Because if you don't have a brand that's really clearly defined, how do you know if that team aligns with it? So some of the biggest mistakes I see startups making is trying to raise money without a really clearly defined brand and story, and building a team around something that isn't clear to ultimately realize, hey, we've got the wrong team. And so this idea of, the Campfire Effect, I want to talk to you about the power of creating that branded proprietary process so that you can clearly articulate to someone in a matter of minutes what it is you do and how you do it in a way that they can connect with and gain confidence. But, when we started thinking about what we wanted to create, how many of you guys have sat around a campfire before? So if I was to ask you, what are some of the thoughts or feelings that come to mind when you think about sitting around a campfire? Comfortable? Warm? Telling stories. Part of a tribe. Kind of feel connected, right? Community. Yeah, there's a sense of community. Have any of you ever sat around a campfire and had the thought, oh my gosh, I hope I don't say something stupid or embarrassing? Like, for some reason, when we get around a campfire, what's that? Yes. You ruined it for me. For some reason, and there's all kinds of different theories on why, and I've studied this a lot, but there's just something magical about the campfire that when we get around it, we instantly become more present, more vulnerable, and our guards down. And I think it's easy to say, oh, the campfire causes this really cool connection. But I think there's some underlying things that we can actually learn about business that allow the connection to happen. I don't think you can form really powerful connections with your team members or with clients unless there's a really natural, authentic trust first. And I don't think there's a natural, authentic trust unless people are willing to be really present, really vulnerable. And I think it happens in that order. So I think when we get around a campfire, just that atmosphere and that environment causes us to be really present and really vulnerable and our guards down, which allows us to trust in this very natural, authentic way. And that natural, authentic trust just leads to these powerful connections. Like I've sat around campfires with people I didn't know, and instantly it's easy to connect with them. It's easy to trust them. So then I started thinking, well, what if we could create that in business? What if you could create a brand that is so clear and so purposeful and a story that's so authentic that the minute someone interacted with your brand and the minute they heard your story, they would instantly feel like, I feel this like sense of trust and connection with this person. And I believe it's possible all through story. But the biggest thing getting in the way of creating trust and connection with people is our own stories. It's us. It's how we present ourselves, and it's how we, present that story. So the interesting thing, I think, about this concept of a brand is the term brand has been used so ubiquitously, and it's just everywhere, that I think it's lost a lot of meaning and sacredness. And in doing that, I think it's lost a lot of the impact it can have. So if I was to ask you guys what a brand is, how would you guys define a brand?
Voice.
A voice?
Supposed to be culture.
What's that?
Culture.
Culture?
Identity.
Your identity? Any other ideas how you define a brand?
Promise.
Promise?
I think a brand is a set of expectations you have.
Expectation. Why is it so easy and natural for most of us when we think brand? Why do most of us naturally think branding, marketing, external, right? That's kind of where our mind goes when we think brand. Why is that?
Because that's what marketing speak does to us.
Yeah, I don't think a brand was ever meant to be thought of as this external marketing, advertising speak. That's what we call branding. It's an element of brand, but brand is so much more than branding, marketing, advertising. And when I walk into those companies, the companies that I see doing really, really well that I get to consult, great culture, high employee retention, high client retention, engaged people, sustainable growth, they really understand that brand starts internal first. They know that branding is simply an external manifestation of what they've consciously decided to stand for internally. And it goes in that order. The companies that I see that struggle with employee engagement, struggle with client retention, struggle with growth, you walk into their organization, you ask anyone in there, hey, what does our brand stand for? It's like asking, hey, how do you feel about the temperature in the room, right? Everyone has a different flavor. No one really is clear on that because they've never defined it. It causes all kinds of problems. That lack of clarity around the brand it's really hard to hold people accountable, because what are we holding them accountable to? It's really hard to make aligned hiring decisions, because how do we know if people align to something that doesn't exist, right? That brand clarity is such a foundational piece, especially if you're a startup, getting ready to go out and raise money, getting ready to build a team, because the story you tell also has a lot to do with how clear you are on what the brand stands for. But it's so easy for us to think external. And I really think that we have an internal brand, and I think we have an external brand, and I think the strategy between the two needs to be aligned. But I think your internal brand strategy and what you stand for should drive, like when you're getting ready to do a marketing or advertising campaign, which, my opinion, right? Throw the bolo tie over my neck. My opinion is I don't think a lot of startups should even be doing marketing or advertising campaigns. I don't think a lot of startups should be investing in branding. But that's the first place they go a lot of times when they get money, and yet they haven't even decided really what they're going to stand for. Which, by the way, you guys are probably wondering, is that guy really wearing a bolo tie? The second thing you're probably wondering is, where do I get one? Because that's awesome. So I'll tell you a little bit later about why I wear the bolo tie.
I was thinking you must be sleeve shirt.
Yeah.
It's a visit.
The pearl snap, long sleeves. Are you visiting?
No.
Okay.
Not from.
Okay, gotcha. So, of all the years we've been studying this idea of a brand, what we boiled it down to is a brand is two things, and a lot of these fit within that. But at the end of the day, your brand is what you've decided to stand for. It's your stand. It's what you've consciously said, this is what our organization stands for. And your brand should be the soul of your organization. Your brand should be the one thing that you can align everything to. Like if you're gonna make a marketing or advertising decision, you should come back and first say, does it align with our brand? If you're getting ready to hire someone, you should come back and say, does it align with our brand? Your brand should be that guidepost that you can look at and align everything to it. But that's not possible unless you've spent time getting clear first on what it is, right? The other thing is your brand is the story that other people tell of you. We can sit in a room as, like, let's say we're all an executive team for a company, and we can sit in a room and make ourselves feel really good about, hey, this is our brand and this is what it stands for. But if our clients say something different than that, it's what they say it is. What's really powerful, though, is when your clients are speaking about your brand in the same way you are, right? So your internal brand aligns with what the story that other people are actually telling you. That's when you get really powerful. And that's when I just believe that our brand belief for our company is that clarity is power. When companies get clear, they get powerful. And with that power, they can start to influence. So the first thing, we walk into companies all the time, and they're like, okay, let's talk about this really cool strategy, and it's really creative, and I always have to like back up and say like, well, our framework starts with like, are you guys all clear what your brand stands for? How many of you guys have a team or work within a team? Okay, so a really fun exercise for you guys is a really simple way to start driving towards some brand clarity. Is an exercise that we do in our workshops where you get everyone on your team, you get them in a conference room, and you say, I want everyone to write down the 3 things that you think our brand stands for today. They can't share, right? It's totally personal. Let everyone do that, and then get all their responses and write down the responses and start seeing where there's some overlap and some themes. So what you'll do is someone might say, ingenuity, innovation, and honesty. And even though someone may not use those exact words, right? The next 3 that go, though, if you can closely align it, start scoring next to and start seeing where the themes are, then you'll also probably start to see how all over the place you are. A great follow-up question is, okay, what are the 3 things we want our brand, what are the 3 things our brand stands for today? A really amazing follow-up question is, what are the 3 things that we want our brand to stand for in the future? So you're comparing today versus what do we want to be known for? And the reason I love those is they're serving 2 different purposes. One is, are we all clear on today? 2, are we even as a team thinking about what we want our brand to be known for in the future? So that's kind of getting us aligned on vision, clarity of our vision. But the thing I love about those types of questions, and I trap people intentionally, it's a trick, is I'll ask a leadership team, hey, what are the 3 things you want your brand to be known for? And they have no problem talking about, like, really excited, like, oh, these are all the things we want to be known for. And then my next question is, what do you think the next question is?
What are your customers?
Okay. That is a great one, but the next question I ask is, okay, so what are we going to have to do in order for our brand to become that? And most importantly, what are we going to have to stop doing that's actually not allowing us to currently become that? Because I don't care what anyone says. You can talk until you're blue in the face about what you want to become as a brand. 99% of entrepreneurs will fall off when they do. If we want our brand to become a brand that is a giving brand, an innovative brand, then are we really willing to look at the hard part, which is what are we going to have to do in order to become that? And are we willing to do it? And what are we going to have to stop doing? To your point, what was your name?
Alan.
Alan? To Alan's point, before I'll ever go into a workshop with a client, I will not go into a workshop with a client until they let me at least interview 3 to 6 of their clients. We have some questions that we've designed just to change over the years. And I ask like some pretty deep introspective questions of the clients, like, what do you think this company's brand stands for? What are they known for? Why do you work with them? You want to get really great insights into your brand and what it actually stands for? Ask your clients and customers. I'm amazed at how many businesses won't just have frank conversations with their clients and customers, and they often have the greatest insights into your brand. You know who else has amazing insights into your brand? If you had to guess, who do you think has amazing insights into an organization's brand? Which employees specifically?
Frontline.
Frontline. Every time I go into a leadership retreat or work with a Fortune 500 company and their leadership teams, and I ask that question, where are the best, most innovative ideas for change and changing the perception of your brand? Where are they found? Every time they say frontline employees. Every time. Even though they could pat themselves on the back and it's only leaders in the room, they could say, oh, leadership. They don't. Even the most egotistical leaders I've run across say it's the frontline people. You know the next question I always ask them?
What are you doing to extract that insight?
What are you doing to harvest those insights from your frontline people? And how often are you doing it? You know what the answer is? Never. So it's just like this kind of punch in the face to them, right? It's like you just told me the very best ideas for insights and innovation for your brand are found from your frontline people, which is a group of people that you totally ignore. You never give them a voice. You never ask them, how can we improve? It's just maddening, but we don't have to make, as startups and small businesses, talk to your people often. I've found that most people want to have a voice. Most people want to share and want to contribute. Lots of people that work inside companies want to be entrepreneurial. They're afraid, though, to bring up feedback because they don't think you want to hear it. And two, there have been times where they've brought up feedback and unknowingly will say things like, oh yeah, we've already tried that. You know what you just did to that person? Probably prevented them from ever bringing up another idea again. I don't care if you've already tried it, right? Let people have a voice on the platform and figure out a way to consistently ask your customers what they think your brand stands for. And they'll tell you. Because your brand is, at the end of the day, it's what you stand for, and it's a story. So what does this whole thing have to do with storytelling? Everything, actually, because how do we know the most compelling story to tell if we're not clear what our brand stands for? So the reason I wear this bolo tie every time I speak, it was given to me by my great-grandfather before he passed away. And so to me, I wear this bolo tie because it reminds me of who I am. It reminds me of my roots, and most importantly, it reminds me of who I want to become. And to me, that is our brand. Like when I think about, so our proprietary methodology is the Campfire effect, but our company is called K-Cross. And K-Cross was a cattle brand that my great-grandfather registered with the state of Arizona in 1950 as a cattle brand. And so when I decided to start my own consultancy, I didn't want to choose a name that was creative. I wanted to choose a name that represented what I want to stand for. And I thought, well, what I want to stand for is everything that my family stands for. Because the K-Cross brand of my great-grandfather, it wasn't just a signification of his product or his service. To him, that brand was a representation of the type of family man he was. It was a representation of the type of man he was in his community. And it was a representation of the type of man he wanted to stand for in business. And I think that's how we should look at our brand. I really have an issue with how a lot of branding is created by branding agencies because it's this very aesthetic, nice-looking external thing, but if it doesn't have any soul that connects. Like I think how brands are created is that you should help people reconnect back to the roots of who they are as people and why they started their companies in the first place, and the result of that becomes a brand. So one of the things I talk a lot about with our story and our brand is I think one of the most powerful things we have is the one thing we use the least. I believe there's this profound connection and strength and power and growth and how many other good words I could use that comes from our roots. I believe the majority of our growth in life and our power and strength comes from our roots. And that's twofold. Our roots of who we are as people and the roots of why we started our business in the first place. Almost every entrepreneur I talk to has lost connection to their roots of why they started their business and almost forgotten. Because when most of us, especially startups, right? How passionate mission driven is a startup? I mean, very few startups start up because they hate what they're starting up, right? Most startups are starting because they believe with every fiber of their being in this thing they're creating, right? And that passion, that desire, and that why, and that purpose, and that drive is so amazing that it fuels all this creative thought and these really cool things in their business. And then what happens? They actually are successful. They start bringing on employees. They start bringing on overhead. And unknowingly over time, they totally 100% lose connection to those roots and why they started their business in the first place. So one of the very first things we do when we're consulting is we reconnect them back to that, and we call it root force. Because it's just this force of power and strength. So our proprietary methodology is called the Campfire effect. And then we have 3 pillars. We have root force, true influence, and brand loyalty. So this idea of root force is, I've had this profound connection to my roots. And when I was thinking about our methodology and when I was thinking about what we do for our clients, it was amazing the amount of inspiration and thought and ideas I got from just thinking back to my roots, who I am, where I come from, why I started my business in the first place. And every time I can get an entrepreneur to reconnect back to that, it's this birthplace of innovative ideas and solutions, because they're thinking things and feeling things about their business that they haven't thought or felt since they started it. And it's never failed. But so important that as a startup, right? What if we infuse that from day one? What if we knew how we as people, because I think sometimes we forget about that. I think sometimes we forget that behind a startup is a real person, and that real person was shaped by something that got them there, right? Well, being consciously aware of what got them there helps them be more intentional in their business, but it also helps them tell a way more impactful story. Do people buy from people or do people buy from companies? Any arguments to that?
Yeah, I don't rarely buy from people.
Okay, in what sense?
Sense that most of the things I buy online. Most of the things that, like I said, it's not enough, right?
What's that?
I'm pretty introverted on the whole, and I'd rather
Just buy online.
just buy online, not have to deal with that, get things, and do my own thing.
Totally.
My friends
Well,
not-
in what sense are you saying buy? Because this could apply to a lot of things. Like, do you buy the vision of something? You probably don't buy that from a company necessarily. You're gonna buy it from like the founder or whoever's telling it. So are you? I mean, if you're specifically saying, do you use Amazon Prime? Okay, fine.
Right.
But I mean, I think this has a lot of implications beyond just.
Totally. I intentionally asked the question to kind of like just stir the conversation. Like, do we buy from people or do we buy from companies or do? And I think the reality is, well, it matters. Right? If we're talking about buying something online from Amazon, we're buying it from a company. But if you're a
You're
startup,
buying it because Amazon is known to get the product to you.
right?
That's why you're on Amazon as opposed to some other website.
So I'll
You're
throw
buying
in,
their brand.
if you have a problem and you talk to customer service and they treat you like a person, not like a pain in their butt that they have to deal with every day, you'll buy from them again, even though they screwed up your order. And as with a
I
person,
don't disagree with that at all.
So I think we could argue, both sides. And the point I'm trying to make is, at the end of the day, we might buy from a company, but the reason oftentimes we keep coming back is because an individual created an amazing experience for us, or the reason we stop going back is one individual created a horrible experience for us. And I just find that fascinating that one individual can make or break a global brand for an entire tribe. Because it's not just you, it's the tribe you're going to tell, right? But especially if you think about a startup, what's a startup really selling in the beginning? An idea, them, a dream, a pipe dream, right? For most, like the Campfire effect was a pipe dream. I'm not like disillusioned, right? Most startups are selling a dream, they're selling an idea, they're selling them. Well, in that sense, that is absolutely, people are going to buy from, they're making a decision on buying Sean, right? If I'm an investor, as much as his product or service. If that's the case, then why do we work so little on who we are as people? Why do we work so little on our people story and our people brand when we know that's what people are buying as a startup? We know that's what's making or breaking someone's experience of being a lifelong customer, and not based on, right, the experience they have with customer service maybe. Because the common response I usually get is, well, people buy from people. And I'll get some people that challenge that. But in those cases where people do buy from people, why do we not work more on who we are as people? Kind of goes back to the leadership. Hey, best ideas are found on the frontline employees. What are you doing to harvest those ideas? The reason I think we don't work on our people side as much is we don't know how. What's the one thing you always hear? The greatest thing you can sell is yourself. You know why I hate that freaking phrase? Have any of you ever heard someone say the greatest thing you can sell yourself? Has anyone ever followed that up with telling you how to sell yourself?
No, there's all these negative connotations with the term sell anyways. Like you have,
Right.
Yeah,
So, I mean, and I believe it. Like the greatest thing you can sell yourself, people buy it from people. but no one ever teaches anyone how to sell themselves as a person. No one ever teaches us any of that. And I was just as guilty. When I first started the Campfire Effect, I was so excited to run around talking to people about storytelling and how great it is and how it can change lives and how I've used it. And then I finally started getting people asking, so are you ever going to teach us how to tell our story? Or are you just going to keep telling us it's like really great and important, this like thing that we can't obtain because we just
I've
doesn't come
actually
out?
had training in that, so I guess I can say it's not universal in that told that.
Right. So there are some people, there are some trainings out there about how to do it, but that's one of the things I think is one of the biggest missing pieces in how many people would like to be more influential? I mean, most of us would love to, whatever that means, right? But again, I think it's kind of like the connotation of sales sometimes. It's like, well, is influential like manipulative or no? Like, I believe all of us were put on this earth to be powerful influencers in our natural way. And so much of being more powerful in our influencing is our ability to understand our own story and tell it. So one of the things I want to share with you is a story formula that we've created that after being challenged myself, I was like, we have to create a formula that formulaically teaches people how to draw the power out of their story and how to share it. And then for one of you guys tonight that wants to volunteer, after we go through this, I'll scribble your story out on the board and then I'll freestyle it and you can record it. I promise you it'll be good. So let me first start by this. How many of you have seen an increased emphasis on the subject of storytelling in the last couple of years? Anyone that's online, anywhere. So I've been fascinated with storytelling since I was a kid, studying it really intentionally since about 2004. And I bet that in the last couple of years, I've seen more emphasis, more content, more keynote speeches. I've been asked to do more speeches on storytelling than in all the years combined. So right now, there is this massive, and it's not small, a massive trend and an emphasis going like this on storytelling.
Why do you suppose that is?
So that was what I was just going to ask you guys. Anytime I see a trend,
Sorry.
anytime I see a trend like that, of any kind, real estate, there's always an economic circumstance taking place in the world, right? That's driving trends. So if we're starting to see this unprecedented emphasis on storytelling, why are we seeing that? What is going on in the world? Because if we know it's driving the trend, it's not recognizing the trend, that's one thing. But if we understand what's driving the trend and how we capitalize on it, that's how we take advantage and benefit from it in our business. So why do you guys think we're seeing this unprecedented emphasis on storytelling?
Oh, it's like attention scarcity, I'd say. Like people you're so barraged with so many different messages, like to pierce through that and actually be heard takes way more effort now. So.
Yeah, how much harder is it to connect with people today than it used to be? How many of you on a daily basis are overwhelmed with just how much information there is and just what's going on, how the speed at which stuff goes on in the world? How many of you would agree that we're more connected than ever in the history of the global world through technology, and at the very same time more disconnected as authentic human beings? And those two things rise together, right? And do we see this one slowing down anytime soon? So there's a lot of business experts, really respected people that are starting to say that the top skill you can have in business in the next 3 to 5 years is your ability to tell a story. Because it will be the only thing that will cut through all the clutter and the crap and the noise. Because we just, quite frankly, we cannot keep pace with technology. Our brains just are not hardwired to keep pace with that. But we can keep pace with the story. We're overwhelmed with communication, and what we really need is context. And things happen so fast today, there's so much information, we struggle to put it in context. And stories allow us to do that. Stories allow us to make sense of our experience and put things in context. But what's awesome about that, you guys, is it's actually a good thing. Because the people that know how to tell stories will stand out even more than they ever did before, right? It's so fascinating to me because the people that actually do care about other people and will take the time to ask questions and listen, which is another thing we talk about, and tell a story, it'll be so much easier for them to win because everyone else is going to, like, I really believe that the world today is just starved for authenticity and genuineness. Most people are so sick of just the inundation and the noise that when they actually connect with someone that has an authentic story, that knows how to connect with them, you're really going to stand out. Like leaders anymore, if you want to be a CEO of a company anymore and you don't know how to really connect with humans and you don't know how to tell a story, you're just not going to lead people. It's just not going to happen anymore. So how do we tap into that power? How do we take advantage of this thing that we know is happening. So the story formula that we have is a 4-part formula. Sean, I think I wrote on this with a Sharpie.
It's a powerful story. Go away.
So the way to erase that, if it won't come off right away, is that it'll dissolve and dry erase.
Why do they have a Sharpie on the whiteboard?
It's a cool joke.
I almost feel like I should do that.
Does that really work? Using a dry erase in the
Yeah.
Well, it dissolves the permanent.
So this is the story.
Yep, you're right.
Just learn something.
Okay, good.
It's not really working.
We'll tell Jeff we had some finger painting classes in here or something.
That works. Is there like a, let me get this.
This is all being recorded.
Is this all being recorded?
We'll edit this part out.
The crime.
Seriously.
Why is there this gap?
I bet there's some teacher, some sick teacher that's like, I'm gonna put a Sharpie there. See if a kid with ADD, which is me,
Nice, there you go.
What is that? That's amazing.
it's just get old fashioned water.
So much wrong with
That reminds me of what's that movie, The Lorax, where they bottle air and sell it to the, you can't tell, right? Is that look good?
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great infomercial for that water product.
I say
It's
the
an
towel.
anti-commercial for
Oh, yeah, definitely highlight the towel.
cleaning stuff.
I think it's the bolo tie. Okay. I actually did all that on purpose. I wanted to make it really dramatic for the story formula, like this build up. Because you gotta have conflict in a story, right? That's how people relate to it.
Yeah, you talk about history about the water rights and the canals.
That's right. We just use this water my great grandfather provided to us to put in the line for. Okay. So the story formula, the first step is roots, identity.
Can you use a different marker actually? It's gonna be hard to
Hard to see.
start it, yeah.
That one's good. Maybe the black one, Sean?
Yeah, I do that. Sorry.
It's nonstop. Constant whiteboard problems. Give them a Sharpie.
Next time I'm just using the PowerPoint. That's it. That's better.
Perfect.
Roots, identity. What do you think is the purpose of this part of the formula? If you had to guess, what are we trying to do with people? Now, again, we're gonna structure our story, roots, identity. What do you think we're trying to do in this part of the formula? Totally just human connection. We're not trying to influence. We're not trying to persuade. This is where everyone skips though. We want to go right to influencing and persuading by talking about our solution and our feature, but we haven't tilled the soil of influence. People aren't ready to be influenced, subconsciously or consciously, unless a connection's taken place. So this is where human connection takes place. This is where, like, hey, I know Sandy, and she knows me, and she's got an interesting background, and I've got an interesting background. And the thing that we take for granted is, if that takes place, that little interaction of human connection, when Sandy actually gets ready to tell me about her solution, I actually care more about it. I'm not just listening out of respect because we've connected. I actually want to know what her solution is in her business is. And she wants to know mine. Because that's just our human nature to connect with each other, right? So in our roots identity, it's really simple. We're telling the people a little bit about who we are and where we're from. Why is it so important to tell people a little bit about who we are and where we're from? trust, common ground, right? The one thing I promise you guys that if you'll do, if you'll go back and think about your roots, who you are, where you're from, I promise you'll learn new things about yourself you've never learned. The biggest breakthroughs I've ever had in my life about my business and what I should be doing have actually come by not thinking about where I want to go, but actually by revisiting my roots. And now I'll be the first to say, so for some people in this room, your roots are filled with fulfillment and joy and happy times and family and all these positive things. And then for others, your roots might be filled with misery and horrible things that happened to you, and a bad childhood. But I promise you that I've seen it all and heard it all. I promise you though, regardless of what your circumstance was, there's tremendous growth and strength and power found there. And you'll learn things about yourself, because what's interesting is when you start to see the connection with your roots and what you actually do today, you start to have this powerful realization that I really am meant to do this. I'm not just doing this to provide, like, there's these dots have always been there. So important for a startup or an entrepreneur that's going to be a startup to make those connections and realize those things about themselves before they go out and get pummeled in the face by the world, right? This is some of the stuff that keeps you going on really crappy days. I didn't know I was fascinated with storytelling and influencing people since I was a kid, until I did this. Now, how valuable is that for me to make those realizations based on the work I do today? It's why I do the work I do today. I had just been living my life, hustling and making money and I was building my life around what I wanted to have instead of what I wanted to be. But it wasn't until I started looking at my roots and where I come from and started seeing these connection points. I'm like, man, these things have been there all along the way. I just haven't seen them. So what I want you guys to do right now is I want you to take just a couple minutes and I want you to just jot down a few things about, like, just talk a little about your roots. So you heard me, I'm 5th generation native Arizona, grew up in a ranching rodeo family, had a deep connection to my roots, hardworking blue collar parents that were awesome. I'm married to my wife, we have 4 little kids, I love the team rope and rodeo. Like that's a little bit about my roots and my identity. So take just a minute and just write down a little bit about that. Okay. Then we're going to shelf that to the side. The next part of our formula is called the journey. So it's a 4-part formula. So the first part is roots identity, and the next part is the journey. So here's something that's really interesting about the journey. What we fail to do oftentimes in our story, which is such a mistake, is we don't give people context about how we got to what we do today. And how we got to what we do today holds all of the gems of the most valuable things that we learned along the way that got us there. What do you think we're trying to, if roots identity is where we're building human connection and related, just common ground, what are we trying to do in the journey, you think? If this is a journey of how we got there, what are we specifically trying to do in this section of the formula? These are hard questions because you don't have any context of the formula. This is where we're trying to build credibility. Because we're telling people, let me tell you a little bit about the journey I've been on and the lessons I've learned that you'll benefit from that it got me to where I am today. Does that make sense? But we totally discredit that. We take it for granted that I didn't just wake up, right, and start the campfire effect. I had some really powerful observations and realizations that I shared with you. Well, when I share those observations and realizations with people, they're hearing it going, holy cow, these struggles that this guy's observed along his way, that's what our company's going through right now. Instant relatability, right? And then my realization, I had a breakthrough. It's like, we need that breakthrough. So the two things that we're really calling out in the journey part of our story is observations and realizations. And here's specifically what we're calling out in observations. Observations are struggles or challenges. And realizations are opportunities. Or you might call it enlightenment. Why do you think it's essential that we share struggle in our story? Whether it's ours, now remember, back to my story, what was the first struggle or challenge? Let's see if you guys can remember the first struggle or challenge I shared in my story about my professional.
You knew nothing about the real estate game when you came in. You had like none of the benefits of someone who'd been in it for a long time.
Okay, so that was the observation around struggle or challenge I had. And then I also observed the struggle or challenge. You want to remember what that one was that I observed in others?
Nobody was related to people.
Brokers weren't taking the time to connect, right? Why is it essential that we share struggle in our story? Whether it's ours, or like in that case, the brokers, why is it so important to share struggle in the story? What's that? There is nothing that makes you seem more human and more relatable and connectable than struggle in your story. Nothing.
And the vulnerability to say it out loud.
100%. You know what happens when I share struggle in my story? Like that, for example, I've shared that one before about the commercial real estate. I'll just say, now keep in mind, if you notice, I use these exact words. If you go back and listen to the recording, I say I had this really powerful observation around a struggle or a challenge. I've had leaders like sales managers, when I share that, go, that's our entire sales department. What you just described about people not knowing how to connect with the people, that's our entire sales department. So they are really now relating, and I'm very human to them. My story's very human, it's very believable, and we're relating. I haven't influenced them yet, but through struggle, I'm kind of tilling the soil and I'm planting the seeds of influence, right? Because if I had an observation around the struggle, then what was the enlightenment I had? What did I realize that could be done about it? Does that make sense? If you're not sharing struggle in your story, whether it's yours or someone else's, you're missing that opportunity to humanize your story and relate to them in a way that's very vulnerable and natural. And so many times we're thinking, well, I don't want to share struggle in my story. I don't want to be perceived as weak. That's the one thing that makes you the most human and believable of anything. Because although our struggles may not be the same, how many people struggle on a daily basis? Everyone. So the important thing isn't that they're relating to my struggle. It's that when I share my story of my struggle, they open up into stories about struggles that they're observing in their own story or that they're currently having in their company, right? And then what are we doing with the realizations? What are we doing? What are we trying to do there, you think? So if I observe this struggle or this challenge, what am I trying to show in the realization?
What you learn.
That I learned or took action. And what that plants in their mind is, well, if you realized and came up with some type of solution, maybe you can help us, right? It's just, guys, this is the part of our story where we get to brag about how amazing we are and talk about how qualified, how overqualified we are to help them with their problem without having to say it like that, right? Without ever having to quote a stat or a feature. We're just telling the natural story. So when I tell people, one of the things I observed is that commercial real estate brokers just really struggle with knowing how to connect with people. They never ask questions, they didn't know how to listen. So I realized, right, that my success was going to have everything to do with listening and asking questions and connecting with people. And within a few months, I was one of the top producing brokers in the firm. Now that doesn't come off bragging or egotistical or arrogant, but what it does to people is like any company that's having a challenge with their people knowing how to connect starts to see me as a viable solution because I experienced it personally firsthand. I realized I did something about it. And then I also share, other brokers started asking me what I did and they started having success with it and I realized I could teach people. I'm basically, all intents and purposes, like selling the heck out of myself in a very just natural story because it is my real story. I'm saying I can teach this, I know how to do it, I've observed it.
It also makes you seem like a regular person. You don't have to be brilliant to do any of these things. You observe, you act.
Totally. Yeah. Now when I'm going to point out that, you know what's the most fascinating about observations and realizations, the most powerful part, is it actually is insight into our natural genius. You could put all of us in a room and put a startup in front of us, and we might all have different observations around their challenge or struggle, and we might have completely different realizations. That speaks to how we naturally view the world. Like Sean and I guarantee you just how different we are. We might see some common observations, but we would definitely have very distinct observations that are really unique and different. But the reason we're having different observations is because we have different geniuses and different talents. We also have different realizations about how we can solve their problem. Like when I was in that financial services company, when those two merged, I was the only one in there that was really observing the train wreck around the brand story and culture. Well, why is that? Why was I the only one? Now, other people were having different observations, right, about struggle, but why was I the only one that was really powerfully seeing the struggle around brand and story and culture?
So that's what you look for.
Yeah, because that's what maybe I'm meant to do. That's the unique ability I have to serve them and help them. You guys want to start really learning about how your natural gifts and talents, start thinking about the natural observations, the way you see the world. That has a lot of insight into why you see the world that way. And if those are the observations you're having, then what are the realizations you're also having about doing something about it? And you start taking action on those realizations, that's when you start getting in alignment with what you should be doing.
So I want to throw in a concept here because oddly enough, Ed was the one who came up with this phrase or analogy or whatever. But years ago, you said we can never see the water in our own fish tank. We can only see the water in other people's fish tanks. And so this is like the curse of going through life with your sunglasses on as your own self, and never knowing that those are the glasses, right? And it takes interacting with others to be able to see what your water in your own fish tank, or your sunglasses, or whatever, this lens concept. I think this is fascinating because it is exactly what you're talking about with that statement.
Well, have you seen that little YouTube video, So This Is Water? It's really this fascinating thing. It shows these two fish swimming next to each other, and one fish goes, "Hey, how's the water today?" And the other fish goes, "What the hell is water?" It's like, well, I don't know what water is like. Right. But that's this. It's like we just go through life. Well, everyone observes the world this way. No, they don't. Everyone has realizations about something. No, they don't. That's speaking to your natural genius and the solutions. And the minute I started acting on this is when I, for the first time in my life, started doing things that I was like actually aligned with. Because I could do things that I was talented at, right? That I could just hustle and make money. The other thing is the connection between your roots and your journey is in most people's minds destiny and purpose. When I started sharing with people my roots and how that impacted this journey, I started getting comments from prospective clients saying things like, well, no wonder you did this business. No wonder you started the Campfire Effect. It's like your destiny. Or like you were born to do a business like this. Is that a good thing for a prospective client to be saying to you? But they start seeing it in your story, right? It's no longer this just, hey, I'm an insurance person or I'm a, right? It's like, no, there's a really intentional connection between my roots and who I am and this journey I've been on. And there's a reason why I've observed these things and had these realizations. It's because this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Who would people rather do business with? Who would an investor rather fund? Someone that can come in and articulate that story where the investor sees the connection, or someone that comes in and is like, hey, I've got the greatest invention in the world and let me tell you about it. I've seen startups with pretty mediocre concepts that get funded that are really clear on how they connect and their story and their brand. And I've seen amazing concepts not get funded because people just have no clue how to go in and give context to it. Like we had a startup recently that came to us and they'd been out with an amazing idea, like unbelievable concept, and they'd been out for 4 months trying to raise money. And I asked if I could see his pitch deck, and I said, give me the pitch. And I always ask for permission to make someone feel horrible. So I said, can I be really honest with you? And he said, yeah. I said, it's terrible. I said, you have way too many slides. And I said, I have no idea why you even are interested in this. He says, well, why are you even interested in this? And then what do you think came out of it? This amazing story about how when he was a kid, he worked with his mom in the garden and had this profound connection to food and gardening, which led him to, it's like this amazing story he wasn't telling anyone. So we took his slides from like 998 down to like 7. We structured the slides around a formula. So we had roots identity slides, we had journey slides, we had solution and social proof, which I'll get to those, and packaged it up in this really powerful story. And he went out and raised about, I don't know, 75 grand in a week. I mean, I can't take credit for that because these are people he'd already talked to, so they had some of, but they were interested, but they just couldn't quite wrap their minds around like, what's the connection? And they maybe even now can't consciously say why, but the connection is there's context there for them to see, oh, this totally like this guy's path, and this solution he came up with, and he couched it, and one of the things I've observed about people with food, and I had this realization, it was all there, it had always been within him, it just needed to be.
Chris,
Yeah.
I don't have my glasses with me. So realizations, what's the first word?
Struggles or challenges,
Yeah, that's it.
opportunities and enlightenment. So it's like I've observed a struggle or a challenge, and I've also realized. Now, one of the things I'll encourage you guys to do in your story and how our worksheets, when we do a workshop, how we do it is high-level observations and high-level realizations. So commercial real estate, high-level observation, people really struggle with human connection. High-level realization, I'm going to have to be able to learn how to ask questions and get to know people to overcome that. Then I really encourage you to go into a specific example to really cement it. So a very specific example I have of that is one time I went on a training meeting with a broker. He literally talked 95% of the meeting. The people said they weren't interested in doing business with me at the end. We go get in the car and he goes, well, I don't know what the hell's wrong with them. I was like, kidding me? Right? Like, and then I have a really specific realization. I was in a meeting one time with a client, and he looked me right in the eyes and he goes, you know what? You have no business getting my business, and I have no business giving it to you, but I like you, and I like your story, so I'm going to give you a shot. Because we built a really cool connection. He grew up in farming, ranching, you know what I mean? So I can really submit that with specific examples. Same with the financial services. Very high level observation was that when people aren't clear on what their brand stands for and how to tell their story, it starts to impact the culture, the client experience, right? I can give a really specific example. One time I was in the waiting room, in the waiting area of our financial services company before we'd gone through this process, and I saw a couple watching the financial news. We were showing the freaking financial news in our waiting room, just asleep at the wheel, right? The stock market had tanked that morning. And this freaking elderly couple's like this. And we're getting ready to send them in to meet with their financial advisor. And part of my language when I was like, what the hell are we doing? Like, this is how we're setting people up? And so just like this kind of, so then I realized. So observation, high level, we need to be more intentional, very specific example. So the realization was we've got to be way more intentional about the client experience. Very specific example of that realization. Let's redesign the office to give a storytelling tour. Instead of having the financial news playing when people walk in, what if we had a PowerPoint loop of every person in the firm, and we have 3 pictures of one picture of them and their family, one picture of them and their family on vacation, one picture of them and their family doing community service. So now when our clients came in and sat down and waited for their financial advisor, they're just watching this PowerPoint loop of all the things that we believe without saying anything. And they would always comment on it. Like, hey, who's the little girl in the pony? Well, it was kind of discouraging because we spent a ton of money on the tour. And the one thing that they love the most is the freaking free PowerPoint back. Which I think there's actually lots we learned in that. And then when I wrapped that up with, and as a result, we were bringing in as many assets under management in a month as we'd ever done in the history of the firm in a year. That's a very, I established a lot of credibility with people through that story, and I'm not quoting stats, I'm not quoting features, I'm not getting off on a rabbit trail of products and services, and I'm not bragging. It's just, that's just what I observed. This is observations, realizations, this is what happened. It's just this very natural way to build credibility in your story. So do we have a brave soul that's going to volunteer up their story to whiteboard it? Yeah. Who do we have? Paul. Paul?
Paul. We'll be kind.
Okay, Paul, what do you do?
What do I do?
Trick question. This one's not a trick question. This one I really want to know. No tricks. Yeah, coming from me on tonight,
We build tech startups.
Okay. So tech startups. Okay, so give me a little about just some bullets about your roots identity.
Okay, we got 3 versions of this. One's a really dry, boring one. Through creativity and innovation, contribute to the advancement of technology.
No, well, give me your personal. You personally, tell me a little about your roots and identity.
All right. I just like to build cool shit.
Okay.
Where are you born?
Born in the Midwest.
Born in the Midwest. Tell me a little about families, interests as a kid. What were you into? What were you fascinated with as a kid?
Creating, building things.
So were you a Lego kid?
Lego, circuits, making logs, robotics. Just about anything that created something.
Okay, what do you mean by? Did you only like building things that created something? Why did you say that? I love building things that created something. Is there any profoundness to that, or just? I'm not trying to push if there isn't.
Yeah, I think it came from recent realizations that that's what I like to do.
Okay.
Is create.
So it's not just about building, but it's building things that maybe create. Any insight into why? I wasn't born with a desire to build or create anything. Do you have any insight why that is? Why were you always fascinated with building things or creating things?
No.
Which is
actually it's true though. That's what brings me happiness. A lot of satisfaction of creating something that I'm proud of and that is useful. People get enjoyment out of it. That stems from everything to from businesses to a play set for my daughter or even my daughter herself. Teaching is building a person. So everything related to creating something is useful or that matters.
And then, is there any ties like to the Midwest or to your family that has shaped some of that roots, or like?
Well, probably, you know, my father was a physicist, so there's a lot of, I guess there's some technology, you know, background there.
Yeah, were you fascinated with that at all as a kid? Your dad being a physicist, did that have any kind of influence on you?
Probably, yeah.
Because the reason I asked Paul, like, one of the things that's really interesting is we'll say things like, I was fascinated with storytelling as a kid. You know what's most interesting about that? Why? I was fascinated with building things and creating things as a kid. Why? You dig there a little, I promise you you'll learn things about yourselves. Again, that's just one of those things we take for granted. I've always been this way. Well, why?
I just find it entertaining that you think your dad's influence was like probably him being a physicist. My dad was a banker. I bet it had a really big impact on me that you don't even know, kind of like the fish in the water.
What was the example with your storytelling? Like you've always wanted, like, why is that? I mean, did you get back to that for yourself?
Yeah, I think the ultimate connection I came to was this. I was ever since I was little, ever since I can remember, I always remember sitting around listening to my great grandfather tell stories. And we had such a profound connection, even though he passed away when I was little. I had to trace it back to realizing I was fascinated with storytelling, and then realizing the reason I was fascinated with storytelling was because of my great grandfather being a storytelling influence. So that was like light bulbs for me, right? The other thing that you hear me talk a lot about is being really intentional. Probably heard me say that word a lot tonight, and then getting really clear. I didn't realize, in realizations, I didn't realize that has been something that showed up in my entire life. Until I started connecting those dots. When I was a kid, I could not, unfortunately, cause a lot of problems for my parents because I could not be one of those kids that could just play sport and have fun. It just was not in me. Like, if I couldn't get really clear on how to get better at that sport and be really intentional and work at it, like my dad said, I was so intense when I was a kid, he thought my head was going to explode sometimes. The pain of not playing was less than the pain of playing and not knowing how to get really good at it. Does that make sense? It was easier for me to quit the sport and walk away. I was that obsessed and that intense. The other thing I realized, the reason I left so many companies, was if I was in a company and they weren't intentional about the way they were doing things, and they wouldn't let me help them get intentional, if they're just like, nah, it's a waste of time, and I couldn't get really clear, again, the pain of starting over was less painful than staying and not making the impact. Huge realization for me that idea of clarity and intentionality has been there my entire life throughout everything I've done. But I didn't realize that until I went and actually started thinking about like, why these things keep showing up. Like, why is this emphasis on storytelling and influencing there? And then so to connect the two, I now get a lot of fulfillment out of being really intentional about telling our story so that we can clearly influence. Like those things have just come together for me. And that's the Campfire effect.
So can I ask you a question, like a meta question about how you're doing what you're doing right now, Paul? Like, do you have a method by which you're digging into, as he's speaking and you're keying in on certain things? What is your process right now?
So, like I said earlier, I think you can get anything in the world if you want, if you're willing to ask questions and dig. Anytime I do this exercise, and I'm going to give Paul his story, probably in a more clear, powerful way than he's ever heard it himself, no one ever gives me the real nuggets when I first ask. So when I first ask for roots and identity, they just give me the stuff that comes to mind. When I first ask him journey, but he says create something, love building, why? Like I just dig, and then I can usually tell like, boom, like when you said my dad was a physicist, I mean about gold mine, right? Something there. Like, and maybe there's not, but like I always have this intuition. But it's interesting, I never talk to someone, and when I do one of these exercises just to kind of show as an example of how much more intentional we can be with our story, no one ever gives me the nuggets. It's just this digging. So I don't have really a process of like, I know what questions I'm gonna ask, but like, you know, Midwest, whatever he says initially, like I always love to build, create, but he said, I like creating things that are useful, not just creating for the sake of creating. Midwest. So your family or Midwest have anything? And he goes, well, my dad was a physicist. So if you dig a little, usually they'll give you some of those nuggets. He's also a teacher. That's probably important. He was a teacher. Who taught physics?
Yeah.
And again, I always tell people, not try, if something's not there, tell me it's not there. Did anything about him teaching physics? Like, were you around things that you've got, like, could you have built as much or had the opportunity to build had your dad not been in physics?
No, I was always at the university while he was working, playing with stuff.
Probably pretty important, right? Connection to your story. Always at the university playing with stuff.
I was also riding my bike in the halls, but I don't know if that's important.
Breaking rules.
See, that was kind of like me, like, I was always at the university playing with stuff. Had my dad not been a physicist, I probably would have been there, which, like, that was for me, like, my great-grandfather was always telling stories. I was around him, he had an influence on my life.
So you had a lot of cool raw materials to play with and see what you can make out of it. And you had a father who helped other people do that too.
So probably encouraged it in you,
I
right?
was into electronics too, which is probably why I became an electrician.
I love when people say stuff like that. Probably why.
That stupid dad controlling my life.
Yeah.
To do some cool stuff. Play with the start.
I had a guy last week that called his dad for the first time in 20 years because of our process. He said, I never realized that something until I started digging into my roots, I never realized that I actually respected my dad as a role model for me. Okay, Paul, if I had to say, okay, shelf that for a minute. If I had to say longest journey of life that you've had, what are some of the most powerful observations you've had around struggle or challenge that just high level you've seen with people, entrepreneurs, yourself, doesn't matter?
Yeah, I got 6 or 7 years of struggles just for this business. Probably the biggest one is for the longest time we couldn't figure out why our clients didn't want to sink as much effort into the software we were building as we did, and why they didn't want to pay us to do it.
Why clients? I'll just put why clients weren't.
So we couldn't constantly struggle to find the right people, constantly struggled to get paid enough money to build the type of quality we were looking to build.
Okay, so with that, why is that though? There's probably some type of struggle or challenge your clients going through that causes that mindset. Like, what did you observe in clients? Like, were they just short-sighted? Did they not know how the technology works?
Eventually, we found that they cared. They didn't care as much about the user experience of their software as we thought they should, or as we assumed that everybody just would.
They didn't care as much about the UI as they should.
So they cared more about what it did than how it did it.
I think they cared more about requirements than building something cool.
They cared more about the requirements than the actual experience it was delivering. Right?
Yeah.
Cool. I start laughing because I see these little connections in your story. I get all giddy about that. Okay, what else would you say? So let's just take those two. What have been some powerful realizations you've had about like solutions or opportunities to break
We were working with the wrong people. It took us 6 years to figure out who our target client was. Which is embarrassing.
So who did you burn out?
Entrepreneurs, startups. They're the people who care about the experience of their product. They're the ones who are passionate. It's not the corporations who just want a tool to save them money, and they don't even know what that is. They know it's going to be better, but they don't really know what the impact is going to be. It's the entrepreneurs that care.
So when you say your business is tech startup, so I can draw some connections here, like so you're taking startups and they pay you to do what for them?
Help them with strategy and development of the product.
Strategy and development of their product.
So we help them with a basic business plan and then build them their minimum viable product.
Okay, you ready for your story?
I'm ready.
Should we wait till Mandy's back?
Sandy.
Sandy, sorry. Sandy, you back? We're gonna get Paul a story. I have to stand up, so Paul. Okay, so my name is Paul. I was born in the Midwest to an awesome family. Probably the passion and beliefs I have were shaped largely by the fact that my dad was a physicist and taught at the university, taught physics. So as a kid, I spent a lot of time with my dad at the university. You know, I had access to build things. I got to create circuit boards, Legos. My dad was also interested in electronics himself, and he really kind of fostered and encouraged this fascination that I had with, you know, electronics and building things. So naturally, the thing I thought was, well, for my business, I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to build and create useful things for people. And so I went to the tech space, and one of the struggles and challenges I had right away is that people didn't care as much about creating something useful as we did. They didn't care as much about the experience as maybe they did about the requirements. And as a kid, I wasn't always just fascinated with creating things. I was always fascinated with creating things that were really useful, creating things that people could actually get value from. So a really powerful realization I had was, well, what if we're working with the wrong type of people? What if instead of trying to work with technology, what if we work with companies that only want to create something useful? What if we work with companies that really care more about the experience than they do about the requirements? And so for me, the big realization I had was we're working with the wrong people. And what I found is that the startups of the world and entrepreneurs, they're kind of like me as a kid, right? They just want to create something useful. They want to create something that's going to impact the world. And so for us, that shift in being able to work with entrepreneurs has changed everything because they actually care about the experience as much as we do. So not only can we help entrepreneurs with strategy around their tech and their startup, but I think we have some lessons about working with the wrong type of client that we can also teach startups to make sure that they're working with the right clients, make sure they're working with clients that align with, you know, creating something useful. So
You made it sound a lot easier than
I should have told you to record that.
It's recorded. It's
Yeah, okay, perfect. Did you guys see? We spent a few minutes on this, a few minutes on Paul's story. Imagine if we all got better at this and actually invested time in this, imagine the influence we could go out and create with people. Now, did I create this? No. It was in Paul the whole time. I just had to help pull it out of him and get it up here. But I promise you, you can connect these same dots for yourself if you just ask yourself why. Like if the first thing you put down on your roots and your identity is I love building, I love creating, I was why? And don't stop asking why until you get to like what you think is, which ultimately led us to the fact that Paul's dad was a physicist that taught physics, and Paul spent time with him at the university. Like, what an awesome story, right? He wanted to create things that were useful and meaningful to people. And then went and saw that, you know, there was a big challenge that people didn't appreciate the experience as much as their requirements. Like this fascination that Paul had to do his kid about creating something useful, they didn't align with that. So the realization is that we're working with the wrong people. But what if we work with entrepreneurs that wanted to change the world? What if we work with entrepreneurs that cared as much about creating something useful as they did about the requirements around creating it? You know, what if we work with entrepreneurs that cared as much about the experience they provide to people?
I think the hat trick here though is then, or the coup de grace or whatever you want to call it, is that whole like then all that crap that we learned along that way, not just getting ourselves to work with the right people, but then turning around and then taking that lesson itself and then putting it to work for those people that we're now working with, because they're going to experience inevitably the exact same thing we did.
Totally. So never take for granted, Paul, that your observations and realizations, the lessons you've learned, are also something. So your product isn't the only thing that serves your clients. In fact, your product may be something that obviously they have to have, but the biggest value you might give to them is your own lessons and experiences that you've learned as an entrepreneur about working with the wrong type of client.
Oh, yeah.
Which isn't even something you consult with,
I can
right?
shave years off their time.
But don't take that for granted. Like, and that's what I'm saying. We take those things for granted. These observations and realizations we've had, that should be part of our core offering, almost as the value add. And you can tell them, look, I'm gonna knock your strategy and all that out of the park. It's gonna be amazing. But the biggest value I'm gonna bring to you isn't that. The biggest value I'm gonna bring to you is what I've actually learned. I'm gonna shave years of headache and stress off of you. Now you become more than a commodity. You become more than a product or a service. You become this like intangible partner in their that's going to mentor them and coach them. And that's just included in what you do, right? So there's this big differentiation too between what we do and who we are. And sometimes we blur those lines. Like, so Paul could easily start saying, well, who I am is I'm a tech guy, I'm a software guy. Well, that's what you do. Who you are is a person that loves to create and loves to teach. And make sure that's the thing that's always coming through. It's like, yeah, what I do is technology and strategy, and I'm going to do that for you. I'm the best there is at it. And you're going to be really happy with that. But where I can add the most value to you is who I am. Because who I am is a teacher at heart. And I've always loved to create things meaningful and useful. So the most important thing I'm going to do for you is I'm going to share with you the lessons I've learned along the way that are going to actually make this strategy really effective and save you years of heartache and headache. So never let what you do become who you are. Like, what we do is develop brands and stories for people. That's not who I am, right? I have a lot of things I can share and help my clients with outside of what I do, just based on the lessons I've learned. Now, where this really culminates, though, into something really cool is the next part of the story formula, which is your solution. Because what Paul really hasn't said yet is he hasn't told us about a solution. Did you notice that in the story? All he's really done is said, my roots got me to here, I got some powerful realizations, and he's now starting to get into a little bit of what he does.
Can I take one step back for a quick second?
Sure.
One thing that I personally liked about his story is the part about how you rode your bicycle through the hallways of the university. And I would ask that you keep that in.
Totally.
Because there's a lot of things about your history that I don't share and I can't relate to, but that I can. I had a bike when I was a kid. So I'm like, oh, that creates a really whimsical, carefree environment where the university was your playground, and I can relate on an emotional level to that. So I don't know.
I love that. Totally. Like, you might say, like, hey, a lot of kids for fun were at the arcades. My playground was the university on my bicycle right through the halls. And that story, right? So, like, sometimes I fail to share my 6th grade story about getting the award for least likely to be found in my seat. And that's a mistake because people love that story. It makes them laugh. They can connect to it, something about their childhood. Totally. I would always, what was your name?
Paige.
To Paige's point, I just did a half-day workshop today with Hop Scratch with Jonathan Cottrell. The thing I said about roots identity is, just like in Journey, we should give specific examples about struggle, observation, realization. Share one real story about your roots. Just one, like riding your bike through the hallways, 6th grade, 7th year. Share one story that kind of culminates and really highlights your roots. Does that make sense? Just one little short, specific story about your roots that allows people to really, like, because you're right, if Paul shared all that and said, yeah, my playground was the university riding my bike, that like cements that image and that creation, and just how much you really love that through that little story. Yeah, thank you, Paige, read that. So then the next piece is, okay, great, Paul, you had this powerful roots, it connects to this cool journey you've had, and what you do is you help with strategy, but how do you do it? This is where you get to talk to people about your solution. And this is where you win or lose people. And we don't realize it. Your ability to tell people how you do what you do. Because again, it's not just what you do. What you do is like, okay, I'm interested in what you do. But what people really want to know, they may not even know how to ask this, is how do you do it? This piece of the formula is the piece that had the most impact on the Campfire effect, my personal business, from going from like 2 and 3 call closes to 1. This was the piece that started building that instant connection and trust. So if roots identity is connection and your journey is credibility, this is where we seal the deal on trust. And this is where you get to talk about your proprietary process. And some of you may be thinking, well, I don't have a proprietary process. And I'm going to tell you, you need a proprietary process. The cool thing about a proprietary process is it's yours. We're always trying to be unique and differentiate, which is a good thing. But like the Campfire effect, you know how many people have the Campfire effect in the world? Me. I'm already differentiated in the fact that I have a proprietary process called the Campfire effect. What's so amazing to me is so many entrepreneurs, especially startups, they have this thing that they're going to do to make all this money, like this one core thing. And that one core thing that they have that's going to make them the most of their money, they never brand that. So they brand their company, but what about the thing that's going to make you all your money? If it's so cool and if it's the solution, shouldn't it have its own brand and its own process and its own way of explaining it? So K-Cross is our company. How many times have you heard me talk about K-Cross? People aren't buying K-Cross, they're buying our methodology, which is the Campfire effect, right? So the Campfire effect is our branded proprietary process. So if someone was asking what we do, which is another thing we won't have time tonight to dive into, but like we have a whole formula on how to tell people what you do in a way that doesn't come out small business consultant, which is everyone. But if someone said, hey, what do you do? I said, we turn people into rock star storytellers so they can create powerful influence on behalf of their brand. So we do. If someone says, how do you do that? I would say through our proprietary process called the Campfire effect. Right? And most of the times if I just say that and shut up, which I have a really hard time doing, they'll say, what's the Campfire effect? I say, well, it's a 3-part framework we've designed that has 3 pillars: brute force, true influence, brand loyalty. Brute force is a 4-step process where we help people get really clear on what their brand stands for and how to tell their story in a powerful way. True influence is where we teach people how to influence in the most powerful way by asking the right questions and connecting their personal story to the brand story. And brand loyalty is where we teach people how to develop an intentional brand experience so that you can turn your clients and your employees into partners in your business. How long does it just take me to tell you guys what we do and how we do it pretty clearly? A couple minutes. That right there used to take me like half an hour to 45 minutes. Like most entrepreneurs and startups, you ask them what you do and how they do it. It's, you know what I mean? Like that was me. But when I started to be able to couch it under a proprietary process, like an umbrella with core pillars, I got it down to like minutes. And what was amazing to me is people didn't want to even know more. I thought people wanted to know all the details of how we did it. When I was able to couch it in a proprietary process, but again, you have to remember, I didn't just start with process. They saw how my story, my roots, my observations, that it all led up to creating this. I was amazed that when I would be done, people would be like, okay, so what's next? I was like, you know, I was used to being like, oh, kind of confused, like, all right, let's get together again. I had to start getting good at saying, what's next is you write a check, you put it in, you give it to me, right? But like, it was amazing to me that I could get away with couching everything I did in this branded process, explaining a little bit about the process, and that was enough for people. Because I clearly articulated how we did it. And the other thing I took for granted is that that built a lot of credibility and trust that I had a process. The fact that I'd taken the time to think through and brand a process and trademark it, right, have pillars, and could talk about it so clearly, subconsciously it makes people think like, hey, this isn't his first rodeo, right? Like, he's clearly done this with companies. He's thought it through.
Well, it seems like it's like the gym trainer who's overweight or something. You're not, if that's your first impression of the person who's going to help you get in shape, clearly that's like not substantiating what they're claiming. But if you're proposing to help people articulate their story very clearly, then if you do that clearly, done, sign me up. Like you just totally sold yourself in that. Yeah,
so if Paul has like, what's the name of your company, Paul? Boundless. So if Paul has this, if Paul goes through his roots, his identity, his journey, he can say that. So here's some of the most powerful observations, realizations we've had. And so all of that led us to create this proprietary process called Boundless 360. And we do 3 things inside of Boundless 360. We do strategy, we do blank, we do blank. And I'll tell you a little bit about each of those 3. The story just continues to flow. People are like, okay, I get it. You won't believe the number of companies I walked into that the very thing they do that generates millions of dollars in their business, they've created trademarks all around it and created little branded things all around it, but never branded that thing. The engine that generates all their money, they don't know how to tell people how it works and what it is in a really clear, succinct way. Then the last piece, and maybe the most important, if that's where you kind of solidify trust, this is where you pick up checks. Social proof. What do people really want to know at the end of the day? All this aside, all this is great, human connection, credibility, trust. What do they really want to know before they write you a check?
It can work.
Is it gonna work? Give me some proof. Tell me a story about a client you've recently worked with that you think is like me, and what was their outcome? So social proof is our client success stories, and I call it liquid gold. The reason I call it liquid gold is because we walk around with our hands open like this, and we let it run right through our fingers and down the drains. How many of you have client success stories about people you successfully served and made a big impact in their life and their business? All of us. And how often are you sharing those with prospective clients? The answer is probably rarely. And if there's anything they really want to know, that's what they really want to know. If you only had 5 minutes with someone who came to me and said, Chris, I've got 5 minutes with a huge prospect and I only have 5 minutes, what would you suggest I share? My number one suggestion was let's ask them a couple questions that will give us the most insight into who they are, and then let's share the most relevant client success story that you have. Because after asking a couple questions, say, you know what, Ed, you remind me a lot of a client we recently helped. Do you mind if I tell them, do you mind if I share their story about how we helped them? I promise you that's not going to say no. That's the most powerful, because there's nothing more valid and validating that I have proof that this works. And we never share them. So the formula for your success story, social proof, is once upon a time. Sounds like a little fairy tale, but it really works. Suddenly, luckily, and happily ever after. So Jack, I'll use connect. I'll use page views. Okay? So if I was saying, hey, Chris Smith, fifth generation Arizona native, grew up in a ranching rodeo family, deep connection to my roots, storytelling, right roots, became fascinated with storytelling in 2000. Well, always fascinated with storytelling, but didn't start using it until 2004. Now, the other thing you guys have to pay attention to, did you notice how I just transitioned from my roots identity to the journey? Figure out where your transition points are in your story so that it flows. So I'll do it again. Fifth generation native, grew up in a ranching rodeo family, always fascinated with storytelling, but didn't start using it professionally until 2004. I just went from roots identity to journey, right? Observation, realization, observation, realization. I realized, so I'll give you the biggest realization. I realized that we had to have a framework to teach people how to tell their story and how to build the brand, which caused us to create the Campfire effect. So now I just moved into solution, right? Campfire effect is our proprietary methodology, blah, blah, blah. Hey, Paul, you remind me of a client we recently helped called Connect. Do you mind if I share their story? Sure. Once upon a time, Connect. Online marketing company, they've been around for 17 years. The online world had changed a lot. Search engines have changed. They found themselves lost, needed to reinvent, didn't know how. As a result, they lacked confidence. Revenue was decreasing. They were afraid to go out and tell their story because they knew their story wasn't relevant. Luckily, now granted, I'm not calling out once upon a time suddenly, I'm not saying that. Luckily, essentially what I'm saying is we were able to take them through. Now, what do you think what do you think, again, Lego principle, what are we inserting into the luckily here?
Solution.
Your branded process, solution. We were able to take them through the Campfire effect, help them get really clear on their brand story. What are we sharing in the happily ever after?
Result.
The result. After years of trying to do this on their own, within about 3 weeks, they completely rebranded, were able to go out and create about $7,500 a month in recurring revenue, and now they wanted to go out and tell their story. They were compelled to go out because they knew it was clear. So the one concept that I want to teach you guys that kind of showcases all this is there's a company called Sixth Division that's a client of ours, and they created this concept called master modular thinking, and it's best illustrated by this concept called the Lego principle, which is something they also created. The Lego principle is this idea that when I was a kid, if you wanted to build a Lego set, you'd go buy a 1,000-piece Lego set, had this pirate ship on the outside, this really beautiful thing you can create, get all excited, you go home, you open the Lego set, you dump the Legos out, and 1,000 Legos go everywhere. And unless you're like Paul, who probably geeked out at that, I'm sitting there like, oh crap, I don't want to put those together. Like, how do I take those 1,000 pieces and turn them into that, right? My mom's stepping on them. She's like, are you ever going to finish this Lego set, you know? Well, Lego had the genius idea a few years ago to say, if we want to provide our clients with a better experience and actually finish these Lego sets, why are we making it so hard for them? Instead of 1,000 individual pieces, what if we took those 1,000 individual pieces and put them in like 8 bags, put them in modules, and then a kid could just build a bag at a time, and those bags click together to create a pirate ship. It's the exact same thing with our brands and our stories. If we were to dump our brand and our story out onto the floor, our life story, it's like 1,000 pieces that go everywhere. How do we know how to piece that together? Well, what we've tried to do with this formula and the framework that we have is Lego-tize that process, right? Just build these modules. So your branded process is the module that clicks in here. Social proof, it clicks into the whole framework, right? And so I could go on for hours, but this is just one small piece of our framework that we teach. But I think it's the most powerful because if you can start to learn how to tell your story in a powerful way, I think you're going to be amazed at the connection you'll build. Now, the last piece of information I'm going to give away, is my most valuable piece, is that the key to being okay, first of all, the most powerful influencers I've ever seen are the best storytellers. But if you want to be a great storyteller, you have to be a great listener. And if you want to be a great listener, you have to know how to ask great questions. So everything I talked about tonight, the power of it depends a lot on your ability to first ask other people about their story. So if the key to becoming a great storyteller ultimately is knowing how to ask great questions, then what are the questions we ask? I just gave them to you. The same formula for how to tell your story is the exact same formula for how to ask great questions. Where are you from? Where are you from? Tell me a little about you. What was it like growing up? What were your hobbies? What are your interests? If I want to ask them about their journey, I don't ever ask, what do you do? I say, how did life lead you here? They can't answer that question without telling a story. How did life lead you here? They're going to tell you about their journey, right? Then I'll ask, well, what were some of the most powerful observations and realizations like that you learned along the way on your journey? They'll tell you about their observations and realizations without knowing it. And then I'll say, like, tell me about who some of the customers you serve. I help people tell me their story following the formula because what it does is the more they tell me about who they are, the more they connect with me. One of the most powerful elements of influence is that people are influenced when they tell you their story, not when you tell them yours. So many people, that's why we call our middle pillar root, we call it true influence, is because I think that the way most of the world sees influence and tries to influence is wrong. True influence is about listening and asking questions, not about talking. Right, I think we're out of time. Any questions of me? Like, I know we've covered that kind of fire hose on you guys, but I just wanted to at least give you this one story formula, personal, that I think can help you, and then use that as a.
Have you written the book yet?
So the Campfire Effect book is started. And so, can I offer?
Yeah,
can I offer you guys something?
Plug
I don't want to try to be salesy, but
Why not?
yeah, but I will. So one of the things that started talking about startups and solopreneurs, forever it bothered me that I would go speak places or do these workshops, and I would have startups or solopreneurs, truly small businesses come up and say, "Hey, we more than anyone need to help. We need help telling our story, building our brand." And I just wasn't very bright and said, "Well, here's what it costs to do a half-day workshop or a 2-day workshop," and none of them could afford it. And so finally, after years of doing that, I finally took all of our content curriculum and I put it into an online course for startups and solopreneurs and truly small businesses. And so it's about a 4-hour course. It's normally $2,000. Anytime I come speak or do something like this, I offer it for 50% off. So if any of you guys are interested, we have a course for $1,000, or sometimes we have people do 3 monthly payments of $397. And then we also just developed another product called it's not as in depth as the course, but it's almost like a starter. It's $197. So if you guys have any information, any interest, or want to know more about that, and if I can help you guys at all in any way, but I love doing this, so thanks for having me.
And is those courses on your site? So where do you go?
They're on Customer Hub through Infusionsoft.
Okay.
But if you guys go to
We'll post the link.
okay,
Yeah.
And if you go to my website, kcrossbrand.com, you can fill out a consultation, get more info. But just if you guys are interested, let me know that you came here so that I can give you a code for a 50% discount on either one of those. If people just come to me and find me through a strategic partner or through an affiliate, it's the retail price. But if I've spoken somewhere and you're interested, make sure you tell me that we came to the LeanPhx.
Awesome. All right. Well, before we break, thank you so much, Chris. This is awesome. One more time for Chris. So you guys, the next one of these that we're going to do, we have Hart Schaefer. Has anyone seen Hart speak by any chance? Nobody here? Hart's awesome. He's really adept at the problem solution interviews when you've got a startup and you don't want to taint the person you're interviewing by giving them your solution, and now they're thinking you got all this experimenter bias and all this stuff going on. So there's an actual way that you conduct these problem solution interviews, and Hart is one of the best people I've seen do it. He works for, he owns his own company, TheraSpecs, but he also consults for Adobe on the side, so he does this for them. So he's going to be here. The date's on the site. I don't know offhand when that is, but I think it's like 2 weeks away. So we'll be doing this again. How did you guys find tonight's meeting? Valuable? Good? Yes? Thumbs up? Awesome. All right, so tell people about this. We're rekindling this group, getting it going again. There's something like 300 people on the meetup, and this is actually the biggest one I've seen in terms of the turnout. So kudos to you. I mean, this obviously resonated. This was a great, great talk.
The other thing is, people are always like, oh, I would have asked you to speak at this startup event or this startups, but I thought you only spoke for a fee. I do a lot of paid speaking, but especially now that we have the course and things like, and just to give back, I just throw that out there. Like, I love getting in front of startups. I love giving out content like this, helping. And I'm just amazed like how many people won't take me up on that. But it's like, we're happy to come give away content and speak. So for what that's worth.
Cool. Awesome, you guys. We'll see you at the next one.
Thank you. My work's go rather large. I think I have 2